for no one. No one but me.
We dance to the drums of war, and all our hearts beat as one.
With the new expansion, Lurkers didn't really hit the mark, and 2 out of 3 of the champions that obviously linked to that theme aren't actually in the meta at the moment. And the same kind of goes for Ekko, which can be only really played with Shurima due to the lack of other prediction tools in other regions. So the new champions, I guess, didn't really hit the meta. Nevertheless, there was a really big balance change that went alongside this, and this is actually probably the most significant impact in the meta. But I bet you're curious to see what impact it's had on top 10 decks. Well, here you go. This is top 10 decks, patch 2.11. The data presented here is analysed by BomberTV using MOBA analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in a pinned comment and in the card above. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on the bell notifications too. So let's dive in. This is Spider Aggro and features a nice 50-50 mix of Noxus and Shadow Isles. The deck is very follower heavy, featuring 28 followers in total and only 9 spells. If you look at the mana cost split in the bottom left, you will see that a mad amount of cards cost 3 or less mana. The only cards costing 3 or more is the 3 copies of Decimate that cost 5 mana. It's a very budget deck with 0 epics and 27 commons, making it great for beginners too. This deck is the essence of aggro. You want to deal as much damage as possible with the first 2 attacks of the game, as essentially your curve ends at 3 mana. This means against control decks you want to develop as much as possible without risking too much from that AoE, even though sometimes you've got to take the risk. But if they have a board clear, then good luck, but all decks have a counter. Legion Rearguard with 3 damage and Precious Pet with 2 damage, and a Fearsome, meaning that very few early game cards can actually block it, can help your very aggressive turns on 1 and 2, so you're going to be doing a lot of damage here. You can deal an insane amount of damage very early. For example, on turn 1 you can summon a Legion Saboteur for 3 damage. Turn 2 you summon a House Spider, who in turn summons a Spiderling 2 for an additional damage. And turn 3 you summoned a Frenzied Skitterer for 11 damage in total, setting your opponent at 6 health by turn 3, so your games could be incredibly short if everything goes in favour here. Later on you can easily burn your opponents from low amounts of health with burn spells like Decimate, and burn units like Doom Beast. Decimate simply deals 4 damage to your opponent's Nexus, and Doom Beast drains 2 from your opponent's Nexus when summoned with Nightfall. So it's not only burns your opponent, but can also help keep your Nexus healthy, because obviously you're going to be playing very aggressively, you need to survive as well. Stalking Shadow is a particularly strong card for the burn purposes, as effectively you can double your burn potential from units like Doom Beast, or simply copy cheap units to go very wide very effectively. For example, copy a Stygian Onlooker, who gains 2 damage and Fearsome on Nightfall, so this is a great unit for quick, easy 4 damage. This is Midrange Frostbite, and the deck features cards primarily from Freljord with some support from Noxus too. Interestingly, many of the key cards from this deck are from Noxus. The deck has a typical ramp to mid-game with lots of 3 or 4 mana costing cards, like most Midrange decks, and it's quite an expensive one with 5 epic cards in total. The idea behind Midrange Frostbite is to level up Ashe as fast as possible, and after you do that, freeze your opponent's board, making them unable to block and go for the win. This is also a bit of a recurring theme in the cards that have 5 or more power in this deck, and I'm going to go onto this later on. To achieve the Ashe level up win condition, we have lots of cards with freeze abilities, like Ice Veil Archer and Harsh Winds. Ice Veil Archer frostbites an enemy on play, and Harsh Winds is a burst spell that frostbites 2 enemies. Nice and simple. You can take advantage of the Frostbite mechanic when you attack with our Glass Cannon unit, Trifarian Glory Seeker, making value trades and protecting them from certain death. So this card obviously has Challenger, it's 5 power, 1 health, but can't block unfortunately. This follower has obviously the potential to do some very heavy damage. As she has Challenger, she can simply challenge the Frostbitten units and quickly take them out without worrying about them doing any damage back to her. So a very nice synergy here. We also have more synergies to control the board against aggro with cards like the Reckoning or Culling Strike, which could be useful to kill bigger targets, especially with the help from Frostbite. The Reckoning kills all units with 4 or less power if you control an ally with 5+ power. Most of your deck has units with 5 or more power, so you're going to really easily reach this criteria. Culling Strike kills a unit with 3 or less power. So obviously any unit that has Frostbite is going to have 0 power temporarily, so basically meaning these cards can easily wipe them out regardless of what their original power actually was. Overall, this is a very flexible deck indeed, and it can play for aggressive, value, and even some control, and it's all tied together by the unique mechanic of Frostbite. You're going to have a lot of fun here. Midrange Frostbite was actually one of the best decks in the game for a while, so we're looking pre-Targon and Shurima era here, but it fell out of fashion a bit. But it never was a bad deck in theory, it just didn't become the trendy deck to play anymore. And it's starting to get back to the top now where it was, so it's nice to see it present and viable again, especially as it's not been around for a while. Frostbite Midrange continues to hold its own and will always do so as long as Thresh Nasus is being around. Obviously, they're kind of, if you see one, you're going to see the other. Azir Draven is a deck featuring cards from Piltover and Zorn and Noxus. It features a very balanced mix of spells and followers and has a very low average mana cost, with all but 2 copies of Captain Farron costing 4 or less mana. It's relatively expensive, featuring 5 epic cards. The core idea of this deck is to get your Captain Farron out as fast as possible and finish the game with him. To accomplish this goal, you need to do 3 things: draw him, survive, and deal a little bit of damage before he comes onto the board. To accomplish the draw part, we have the so-called discard package. Discard to draw cards like Sump Dredger and Rummage are fantastic draw tools, which unfortunately would not really increase your hand size, but basically quickly cycle through your deck faster to get the cards you need. That's where Draven, Chump Wump and Ballistic Bot come in. By generating cards which are not as very useful, you can use them as basically easy discard targets and replace them with more valuable cards. To survive, you have lots and lots of control tools, like Mystic Shot and Thermogenic Beam. Use these to take out your opponent's key cards. On top of that, all the units from the discard package are pretty good blockers too. Ezreal can be involved in your game plan, which also helps on the control side, giving you additional Mystic Shots. Finish off by summoning Captain Farron and using his Overwhelm and the decimates he generates to quickly finish off your opponent. Captain Farron that appears in this deck got nerfed, and this deck is much more noticeable than all the others that he was basically running. So this deck is still super consistent though, which is why it's still pretty high on this list, but not the #1 spot. Captain Farron. Azir Draven got a pretty big nerf with Thermogenic Beam, but it's still kind of holding its own, hence why it's still in the meta in some shape or form, but nowhere near as strong as it once was. This is Zoe Lee Sin Targon and features cards from Targon and Iona. It's a very spell heavy deck featuring 23 spells in total. Has a lot of low cost cards too, with 23 costing 2 or less mana. The deck is fairly expensive with 6 epic cards. This deck is the finest example of how a combo deck can work. You want to survive against aggro decks, and you want to get your combo out as fast as possible against control decks before they get to their late game. The combo here is to level up Lee Sin, cast Zenith Blade on his ability so it hits the Nexus and removes the blocker, and then with the Overwhelm from Zenith Blade, Lee Sin will actually hit the Nexus, making it an unblockable double attack, which seems broken, and to be honest it probably is. You would think that this is really simple and easy to achieve. In theory it is, if you can survive long enough. For this we have cards like Sparklefly and Eye of the Dragon. Sparklefly and Eye of the Dragon's Draglings both have lifesteal, so you'll consistently summon Draglings with this as the deck has so many low cost spells. Buff your lifesteal cards up with spells like Pale Cascade and Bastion to make their damage bigger, meaning your lifesteal heal is also bigger as a result. Next, we want to level up Lee Sin, and to do this we have to cast cheap spells, and cards which generate those cheap spells, for example Mentor of the Stones who can create gems, or Pale Cascade once again, as this is just 2 mana. Then occasionally you may have removal spells of challenger cards trying to take out your Lee Sin, And aside from his obviously natural barrier you can get through his ability, you can also cast protections like Deny or Bastion once again. With the introduction of Zoe, the Lee Sin Targon archetype got some changes, but essentially plays out the same way. Zoe can generate super cool star charts which contributes to Lee Sin levelling up, so it's not really key to the theme of the deck, so she basically acts as a glorified follower. So overall this is a very skill based deck and in the right hands can be absolutely devastating. With the recent buffs to Iona, Zoe Targon actually starting to be a little bit more relevant again, and it's nice to see. I always quite enjoy this deck. This is Tryndamere Trundle and features cards primarily from Freylord, but also includes several spells from Shadow Isles to support the game plan. The cards in the deck are very late game orientated, and this is reflected in the card's average mana cost, with 26 cards out of the 40 costing 4 or more mana. The deck is medium budget with only 4 epic cards needed. The deck plan is to survive long enough until you can play Feel the Rush on your attacking turn and win the game. Feel the Rush is a 12 mana costing spell from the Freylord that summons 2 different random champions from your hand or deck and raises their stats to 10/10. In this deck you only have 2 champions, Trundle and Tryndamere, so they will be summoned to the field with a powerful 10 power alongside their keywords of Overwhelm. Trundle's regeneration and Tryndamere's level up effect will help them stay on the board for extended periods if you don't win on the turn you play them, meaning you're hopefully going to win the game one turn or pretty much the next turn after that you're attacking. To do this all, you first have to survive the early game, use control tools such as Avalanche and Vengeance. Avalanche deals 2 to everything on the board and Vengeance kills 1 unit on the board. So use this to take out your opponent's keywords and Avalanche to do board wipes when your opponent has lots of low costing kind of health cards. You can also get to the late game with board presence thanks to a card like Avacyn Sentry, which allows you to draw 1 card when summoned, so you can obviously get the key cards in your hand that you need to kind of ramp up. Healing can also help you get to the late game. Use traditional healing tools like Withering Wail or the newer Freylord ones such as Blighted Ravine. You can also speed up the process to late game thanks to ramp cards like Castles of the Aeons, which very simply gives you an empty mana gem and also heals your Nexus for free, so linking in with the kind of healing theme as well to try and get you to late game. Finally, cast Feel the Rush and win the game. I know it sounds pretty simple, but control decks are actually a little bit harder to pilot compared to more aggressive decks, so make sure you want to commit removal absolutely when it's needed and know who your biggest threats in your opponent's decks are. This is Irelia Azir and features cards mostly from Iona with a good amount of Shurima cards too. It's a fairly standard mix of followers and spells. Like many aggro decks, most of the cards have a low mana cost, with a huge number of cards costing 1 or 2 mana. It's actually fairly budget to build as well, with not a single epic card needed. This deck is super aggressive. The main idea is to summon lots of units, go wide, meaning lots of units on the board basically, and attack as many times as possible. Azir and Empress Diaz have the effect to summon a Sand Soldier on attack, so if you have both cards on the field you're going to get 2 Sand Soldiers with every attack you do. Absolutely insane value. There's been a new keyword added to the game, Blade Stance. Blade Stance starts a free attack with that many summoned blades, and in separate attack phase, a bit like Scouts. Lots of unit cards revolve around this mechanic, including Ribbon Dancer and Blossoming Blade in this deck. The Sand Soldiers from Azir and Empress Diaz effect will also be summoned on these Blade Dance attacks, meaning you're going to get a very wide board with lots of pressure. Cards like Sparring Student and Green Grey Duo both have effects that gain power when other units are summoned, meaning you can quickly build them up into threats each round with obviously all the blades that are being summoned, all the Sand Soldiers, and meaning you're going to have a really wide board with big power units too. Combining all the Blade Dance combos with all the Sand Soldier attacks means you can have pretty explosive attacks starting from as early as turn 3, often levelling up Azir or Irelia by turn 4. This means you can access their leveled up effects super quick and close the game nice and early. Another win condition is via Aspiring Marshal, which basically triples the threat of Blades and Sand Soldiers. So Aspiring Marshal has the effect of granting 2 damage to summoned allies the turn you play it. This means a Blade and Sand Soldier has an extra 2 damage just off the back like that. And you're going to be summoning a lot of these, so this is going to quickly add up. This deck's pretty hard to counter, to be honest. The best 2 options are using variants of Fiora, even combining her with Freylord, Shurima, or even Targon. By using Fiora, you can take advantage of all the blades and Sand Soldiers that your opponent's going to be attacking with, and use this to help level up Fiora very early. often not letting kind of your opponent be able to play Blade Dance cards because they're scared that one of these blades is actually going to lead to Fiora basically killing 4 opposing units and winning the game for them. So basically you can really kind of get them scared to actually use what the deck obviously Azir Irelia thrives for. Another counter to Azir Irelia, ironically, are burn decks, and the most effective of them right now is Noxus Shurima Aggro, which ironically features Azir once again. With this burn deck, you're looking to simply be more aggressive than your opponent and beat them over the finish line. You're going to be out trying to aggressive them. You can find a more detailed version of this deck in basically on how to counter them, and BomberTV's done these, and you can find it in the card above. This was the nerf we all wanted to see, but it's still doing quite well, but not dominating the meta as much as it was once upon a time, so I'm happy for now. This is Discard Aggro, and it features cards from Noxus and Piltover and Zorn. And it's quite a unique deck in the sense it features 3 champions, but the main variation you'll see of this deck definitely includes Draven and Jinx, and these are obviously the 2 cards that are linked to the discard mechanic in one way or another. And it's a very typical aggro deck with lots of low costing cards. The deck plan is quite simple. Against slow decks, try to finish your opponent as early as possible before they get their endgame. Against aggro or mid-range decks, you can try and win the race against them to see who can finish faster. Or you can go for the value approach granted by the leveled up Jinx. Of course, you need to first draw her and then level her up. As the name suggests, the deck is all around discarding, so cards which you can both discard and draw are very desirable, such as Zornite Urchin and Rummage. The deck has a lot of options, smart plays, and therefore is a very skill-based deck. First of all, it's always important to know when to discard a card and what ones you should be discarding altogether. For example, there are obvious discard targets such as Flame Chompers, Jury Rig, and Vision, and these are pretty straightforward what to discard. As for the when to discard a card, Jury Rig can be useful to summon a blocker or attack at burst speed, either punishing their open attack or to go in for the kill. The same goes for discarding Flame Chompers at burst speed, although it is much more useful to remove a big blocker so that your other units can basically go in and do what they need to do. Vision should be used to go in for the kill and take your opponent off guard, or to complete trades. This can always be a win condition in some situations. With the new addition of survival skills, Discard Aggro seems to be getting a lot of love from Riot at the moment, and continues to be one of the best spots in the meta. Even if this list doesn't run survival skills, I would still suggest experimenting with it. Discard Aggro finally got a big hit with the nerf of Rummage, but it's still one of the strongest tech out there, hence why it's still going to have fairly good win rates. This is Thresh Nasus, and features cards mostly from the Shadow Isles, with a large number of cards also appearing from the Shurima region. It's a bit of a control aggro hybrid, if that even makes sense. It has a lot of low costing cards, but the win condition's more controlled focused. It's a medium budget deck with 3 epic cards needed. The idea behind this deck is to play aggressively in the early game, often winning just from pure aggro. And you also have lots of low cost followers to help with this, and they can deal big damage quick, so think Backeye Reaper or Ravenous Butcher for example. Alternatively, you can try and finish the game much later with a high powered Nasus and Atrocity. So Nasus gains 1/1 every time you slay a unit, giving him lots of potential power, and Atrocity deals damage to anything really, including opponent's Nexus, equal to a unit that you sacrificed power, and this can be a win condition in a lot of occasions. The deck essentially plays out like the They Who Endure deck, so those who are familiar with that deck, it's a very easy kind of play style here. You're just kind of replacing They Who Endure with a big Nasus. Since Nasus is our win condition, we want to cheat him out and get him as fast as possible on the field, and that's where Thresh comes into play, helping us get Nasus onto the board quickly with his leveled up effect, which summons an attacking champion from your deck the first time a leveled up Thresh attacks. To help Nasus get lots of power, so many cards in this deck involve killing your own units to contribute to the slay tally, so this includes units like Blighted Caretaker and spells like Rite of the Calling, which both involve killing one of your own units. You also have lots of ways to draw, both for refueling fuel, which an aggro deck needs because they're going to be using lots of cards quickly that die, as well as getting your combo out faster. So these drawing cards include cards like Spirit Leech or Glimpse Beyond, which also have effects that involve killing your own units. So once again, supporting that slay total as well as helping kind of fuel the aggro engine. It may sound crazy, but actually the best decks to counter Thresh Nasus are Scargrounds decks, either with Sejuani and Swain or Braum Vladimir. Both of them have Frostbites, which are essential to counter Nasus' the Atrocity combo. If you Frostbite Nasus when you're about to do Atrocity on him, it's going to do 0, so you have massive counter. Sejuani Swain is a bit more control-like. You're basically trying to stabilise, remove and finish off the game with the usual Swain Leviathan combo. This is a really nice approach to take. Another good deck to combo is Braum and Vladimir, as you basically go wide with lots of units and big power thanks to Scargrounds. And it can also help you heal outside of lethal thanks to Vladimir. You're going to be draining your Nexus healths up so that simply the Thresh Atrocity combo cannot finish your Nexus off. And you can find a more detailed version of this deck linked in the description. Despite all the nerfs to Thresh Nasus recently, this deck is still in the top 3. And I'm kind of wondering what it would actually take to bring this archetype down. Do you have any suggestions? Here is another deck you'll definitely recognise. It's Pyre Aggro, featuring cards from Noxus and Bilgewater. It's an aggro deck with a very mixed mana cost, with several cards costing all the different mana costs from 1 to 5. It's quite an expensive deck to build, with 8 epic cards in total. The power cards here are Misfortune and Gangplank. Even if Misfortune will struggle to level up, she's here just a consistent way basically to level up Gangplank and make your board much more threatening on your attacking turns. Gangplank can then end the game against wide boards, and therefore making aggro mirror matches quite easy with this deck. This deck wants to develop a board early on, and you can do this with a very quick start to the game with burn cards such as Lieben Saboteur and Jagged Butcher. Afterwards, has a lot of ways to end the game with burn with units like Imperial Demolitionist or Jack the Winner. Jack the Winner creates a Sleep with the Fishes each round, which deals 2 to an ally to deal 2 to the opposing Nexus. You also have Zap Spray Fin, which will be able to draw you a Noxen for 4, always, as this is your only spell card with 3 or less mana, and this is obviously a fantastic card in this deck which can be very aggressive. If you reach late game, you can quickly close the game with Captain Farron and Decimate. Using the Overwhelming Captain Farron and the pure damage from Decimate will quickly reduce your opposing Nexus to 0. So overall this is a pretty solid deck and a very fast one too, so if you want to rank up quickly, this is definitely an option I recommend. Pyre Aggro receives a nerf to Captain Farron, but some deck lists of this Pyre Aggro archetype don't even include him. So even if they do, you're going to have such a strong aggressive opener with 2 Decimates that's probably going to be more than enough for this deck, so I'd say it's basically unchanged. Now that the meta is a little bit more kind of back to normal, this deck continues to be one of the most broken aggressive strategies there is in the game currently, so hence why it's at this spot and dominating the meta. This is Sivir Le Blanc and features cards from Noxus and Shurima. It's quite spell heavy with 19 in total. This deck has no cards costing 5 or more mana, being in line with most aggressive decks. It's quite budget with 23 commons and 3 epic cards. The idea behind this deck is to activate Reputation as fast as possible, whilst also trying to level up LeBlanc and Sivir. LeBlanc levels up when she sees you deal 15 damage, and Sivir levels up when you've dealt 35 damage altogether, so some similar themes here about all dealing damage. Reputation activates if allies have struck for 5+ damage on at least 4 occasions in the game, so it also helps lead to these level up in turn, so you can see the pattern here. This deck has followers with over 5 damage that can help lead to Reputation being activated. So early on you have Trefarian Glory Seeker, and later in the game you have the new Ruin Runner, which has Overwhelm and Spell Shield. You also have spells to help activate Reputation. You have the new Bloody Business, where an ally with 5+ damage strikes an enemy. Additionally, you have the new Spell Shaped Stone to help buff allies enough to be able to deal 5 damage. LeBlanc is very easy to remove, but against certain decks with no removal she can be very aggressive and later on generate more copies of herself, which in turn can be generating more copies, and you get the picture. Sivir on the other hand is much more solid with spell protection already built in and a keyword designed to be good on attack, making her one of the best aggressive champions out there. Later on she can be a game winning bomb by giving protection to your whole board and maybe giving them Overwhelm to go in for the win. So overall this is a very interesting deck, aggressive with some extent for some combos. With the buff to Sivir and some added support as well, it's finally the time for this archetype to shine, especially in a meta with not a lot of aggro and not a lot of control, so basically the perfect time for a mid-range like this deck to thrive. And there we go, what do you think to the new meta? Just as we're getting used to this one, we're getting a new champion called Viego, who is going to be extra support for Shadow Isles. Safe to say, no one really saw this champion coming, and it's a nice surprise. I wonder what impact he'll have. Who is your favourite new champion? I would love to hear in the comments. Up next is Top 10 Decks patch 2.12, taking a look at the wide range of decks dominating the next meta when Viego is introduced. The data presented here is analysed by BomberTV using MOBA analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in a pinned comment and in the card above. I've recently set up an Instagram account, @LoreGuides, and I'll be doing a giveaway shortly. Please follow this account for see posts about new videos, and for being a chance of winning this giveaway. Please remember to like and subscribe, and turn on bell notifications too. See you next time, guys.